Does that make sense? So when you inhale, diaphragm comes down, pelvic floor comes down, and you've created an isometric hold between your pelvic floor, diaphragm, and all of your interspinal stabilizers, your transverse abdominal muscles. Everything in here has created an eccentric isometric hold. So eccentric lengthening, meaning lengthening, okay? So that's the breadth of what it's created. You're holding on to that tension throughout the entire lift. So as you exhale, you're still trying to maintain that tension throughout the exhale. Does that make sense? So even though you're exhaling, you're not letting go of that stability. One of the things that I'll do to like practice this is even just in a dead bug position, breathing 360 degrees, holding that tension as long as I can through an exhale. Okay? So, or maybe you can inhale and exhale out of it like a straw. Like, it's shallower breaths. We're not getting as deep of a breath, obviously, but we can still hold on to that tension and inhale and exhale out of it, right? So like, for example, I would say this breath use should be used a lot in the like next hypertrophy cycle, and maybe a little bit in the beginning of like that true strength, where you're inhaling, stabilizing down, but I haven't lost control of that tension the entire time.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I would use that. Valsalva, like that true, like hold your breath and let it rip roar, that's gonna be your PRs, that's your performance-based stuff. That's the stuff that, like, if your pelvic floor or core can't handle that breathing, that's our stopping point, right? So if you get under load and you're holding your breath, or you're creating that tension and you're having pelvic floor incontinence or any issues, that's your pelvic floor way of saying like progressive overload is done. I have nothing left for this lift. I use the example of like a front squat for me, way back in the day. I hit 195 for one, and I was extremely excited, super pumped, felt great, put 2.5s on, I'm like, I'm gonna break 200, like yes, like finally. And every time I went to the bar with 200, my pelvic floor is like, nope. Like I could just feel like I was gonna pee my pants for a second out of the bottom, like every time. So I never broke 200, probably never will, but that was just like the stopping point for me. It is not worth me peeing my pants to stand that up, believe me. Mm-hmm. Not worth it. There's not a whole lot in this world that's worth peeing your pants over. Okay, but it's also a symptom, right? Like my core is telling me something, like that load is no longer appropriate for me. Cool? Did that answer your question in a longer way? Other questions on breath, mobility stuff, any of those things? Front squat and back squat, really truly, same thing, core versus hinge pattern a little bit. Like usually back squat is limited by the range of motion in the hips and the ability for the person to really like activate the hip drive. Front squat, 9 times out of 10, it is limited by the ability to stabilize the core still, because we'll see this happen, right? Like it just crumbles, the core has collapsed. So when we say elbows up, what we're actually trying to do is get you to stabilize your core, right? Because if we're here and we'll say elbows up, elbows up, elbows up, because we're trying to keep your core stacked versus collapsing under that load. Okay, it's not that this is like actually important. I mean, it is, but really what we're trying to say is open your core. And then back squat, again, it's in the hip drive. Like, what are the hips able to stand out of the bottom of the squat? Other thing is if you notice, you feel like that was what I wanted to say earlier. If you feel like your knees are caving in regards to hips. So if you're coming out of a bottom squat, when mine get heavy enough, you'll see I do this a little bit, right? We call them Bambi legs, because it looks like, do you remember Ashlyn squatting? Oh, sweet baby Jesus. I don't know how she has never hurt herself, to be honest. It would be, and I am not joking, like every time. Like when it got heavy, it was, whoo. And I'm like, oh my God, like that has to hurt so bad. No, she would get them. Okay, what does that tell us? Your abductors are weak. Okay, so these outer hip muscles are weak. They're not stabilizing the knee staying out, okay? Because this is all in here. So what do we do for that? Lateral banded walks, fantastic. Different positionings on the lateral banded walks. Clamshells, here, like opening that hip, making sure that the hip is staying stacked though, and it's not rotating back as you're opening, okay? We're staying stacked and we're opening from here. Leg extensions, like good old Jane Fonda style, here. Toe pointed in, getting that outer thigh, okay? For an extended range of motion, I've done these before, where you're on the bench and you can get your leg lower than your foot and then pulling up from there.
So some of that knee movement is like we're not gonna blow. I mean, I realize you can't always say that, but like we're not gonna blow.
No.
It's just that it's heavy weight, and so
yes,
we're probably
yes. And like for me, I just notice as it gets heavy,
right.
that's where I start to compensate. So I'm aware this is an area of my body that I need to consistently like stay attuned to, and doing lateral ranges of motion. That's why Tuesdays or Wednesdays. One of these 2 days you're doing a lot of lateral work. You're going to the side intentionally. I think it's Wednesdays. Like Cossack squats. Those different types of things where I'm intentionally getting you moving to the sides, trying to make sure that those hips are stronger. Okay. But yeah, if you see that, that's usually here. A here issue. Other common ones? Butt wink.